Sometimes, the human mind carries stories that seem to exist outside of time. Such was the case of Corey Goode, an American boy who grew up in the suburbs of the United States during the 80s and 90s. From an early age, something in his dreams set him apart from other children. While his friends spoke about cartoons and bicycles, Corey described places no one knew: metallic structures beneath violet skies, oceans that didn't reflect the sun, and beings whose eyes seemed to carry centuries of wisdom. For his family, it all began as an innocent curiosity. But as years passed, his descriptions became more detailed, coherent, and filled with elements he could never have learned on his own. Corey spoke of colonies beyond Earth, cooperative civilizations, and a kind of interplanetary spiritual mission that he believed he had lived before being born into this body. Among the oldest records are notes written by his mother, small notebooks where she lovingly described her son's strange remarks. In one entry, she wrote down a sentence that she would never forget. "Mom, time doesn't move there. It breathes." As he grew, Corey began recalling memories of training, contact, and collaboration between human and non-human groups. For researchers studying reincarnation, his case fit into a rare category: memories of lives that seemed not to have taken place on Earth. Even as he grew older and blended into ordinary life, school, work, family, that feeling of belonging to something greater never left him. Many thought it was fantasy, yet Corey insisted these were real memories, experienced in a reality that coexisted with ours, but vibrated at another frequency of being. His tone was calm, almost meditative. He didn't try to convince, he tried to understand. This reflective stance caught the attention of researchers of interdimensional memory, experiences that appear to cross the boundaries of time and matter. At a time when the U.S. was entering a wave of new spiritual movements and technological progress, Corey found a space to share his experiences. He began recording testimonies and attending gatherings where people discussed expanded consciousness, parallel lives, and soul missions. What no one expected was that, by sharing his memories, Corey would awaken something deep in others. Men and women who also claimed to carry recollections of other worlds, other forms of life, even distant civilizations. It was as if his words had opened an ancient window in the collective mind. And this was only the beginning. In the years that followed, Corey drew the attention of researchers intrigued by his descriptions. Psychologists and regression therapists, used to hearing stories of past earthly lives, were puzzled. What Corey described went beyond any known paradigm: orbiting structures around distant planets, communities of humans and other beings living in harmony, and a spiritual education that transcended space and time. In hypnotic regression sessions, Corey entered altered states of consciousness and described details with astonishing precision: metallic sounds, low-gravity atmospheres, and colors of unknown worlds. Though there was no physical proof, the coherence of his accounts suggested something genuine. Some researchers saw these memories as symbolic imagination or archetypal material, while others began to consider that Corey might be accessing subtle levels of experience, dimensions where consciousness manifests beyond physical form. One therapist noted, "What we witness in Corey is more than memory. It is an echo of existence, a recollection that seems to travel across universes." Alternative media outlets took interest. Spiritual magazines and late-night radio shows invited him to speak. Yet Corey never sought to convince, only to reflect. He often said, "My goal isn't to prove anything. It's to explore the nature of consciousness." He began attending reincarnation conferences, presenting the idea that the human soul could live in multiple realities, not just different eras, but different worlds. His words echoed an old concept found in both Eastern and Western mystical traditions: life as a continuous cycle of learning through visible and invisible realms. Some compared his case to the writings of Amalia Domingo Soler, the 19th century medium who spoke of the soul as a traveler of infinity. Others drew parallels to near-death experiences that describe luminous dimensions of knowledge beyond logic. Over time, Corey's name spread among both spiritual and scientific circles. For some, he symbolized a new awakening of planetary consciousness. For others, he remained a mystery, a reminder of how vast the mind can be. But for Corey, all that mattered was the quiet inner feeling that these memories were not fantasy. They were calls to remember an ancient truth, that life is much greater than we imagine, and time still breathes. As Corey's story gained attention, the lines between belief and science began to blur. To some, he represented proof that human consciousness could transcend space and dimension. To others, his memories were poetic metaphors, attempts of a sensitive mind to make sense of the unspeakable. Yet Corey stayed centered. In his lectures, he reminded audiences that truth should never be imposed, but discovered within. He didn't ask for faith, he asked for openness. "It doesn't matter where memories come from," he once said. "What matters is what they awaken in us." While spiritualists saw him as a messenger of new times, skeptics analyzed his case through psychology and quantum theory. Some suggested he was tapping into the collective unconscious, a shared field of spiritual memory. Regression sessions intensified, capturing vivid imagery, glowing structures above lunar surfaces, people in robes of light, a constant hum that seemed to sustain reality itself. Many noticed that his visions echoed descriptions from mystical texts, accounts of non-physical schools where souls study between incarnations. Filmmakers and researchers began documenting his sessions. In the recordings, his calm voice carried the weight of something timeless. At one point, he recalled awakening in a golden realm surrounded by luminous beings, a space of preparation between lives. For those studying reincarnation, this vision symbolized a universal idea, that the soul does not belong to one world, but to the cosmos itself. As debates continued, Corey's message softened. The memories were no longer about outer space, but inner transformation. The line between visible and invisible began to dissolve. With growing attention, Corey began to meet people seeking meaning beyond reason, those who carried hidden pain or a sense of not belonging to this world. He listened with empathy, recognizing in each story a fragment of the same cosmic journey. During a spiritual retreat in the Colorado mountains, Corey shared one of his most profound experiences, a vision of a luminous presence communicating not through words, but through vibration. He described it as reunion with an ancient source, something that transcended identity itself. "That presence didn't speak my name," he said. "It remembered it within me." Many participants wept. For researchers, it was an example of origin memory, experiences that evoke spiritual truth beyond proof. Corey realized his mission was not to validate facts, but to inspire transformation. He began to speak less about what happened out there and more about what was awakening inside. His tone shifted. Fewer explanations, more reflection. People gathered to meditate, share experiences, and explore the idea that some souls carry stellar origins, not as escapism, but as expansion of perception. In his solitude, Corey wrote quietly in his journals, "Memory is the soul's language. When it speaks, time listens." The search for evidence had turned into a search for meaning, and in that silence, another revelation emerged, one that would finally show him who he truly was. One night, during meditation, Corey felt something different. It wasn't a distant vision, but a living presence, a sense of belonging. For a moment, he said, the veil lifted, and he understood everything. I didn't see planets or ships, he whispered. I saw home, and it was inside me. That moment closed a cycle. The images of interplanetary colonies became symbols of one eternal lesson. The soul is a traveler of infinity, and each life is a station along its journey. He began writing and recording reflections not about the cosmos, but about kindness, empathy, and unity. For Corey, remembering other lives, earthly or otherwise, meant remembering who we truly are. Researchers noticed how much he had changed. The man who once spoke of distant worlds now spoke of the importance of presence. We don't need to go to other worlds to evolve, he said. We just need to remember where we all come from. To many, Corey became a mirror. Even skeptics admitted there was something deeply human in his search for meaning. His journey reminds us that perhaps the greatest mystery isn't among the stars, but within the soul that gazes at them. If this story awakened something in you, subscribe to the Circle of Lives and continue exploring with us the connections between the visible and the invisible. Because every memory, earthly or cosmic, is a door to the infinite. After the revelation that changed his perception of life, Corey Goode entered a period of deep retreat. There was no longer a need to prove or to explain. Everything he had once sought in the stars now seemed to echo quietly within his own soul. He stopped giving lectures and interviews for a while. Most days, he would walk at sunset, write in his journals, which he called inner maps, and reflect on silence as a teacher. The mind travels, he wrote. The heart remembers. The soul observes. Those around him noticed a subtle change. He spoke more softly, moved more slowly, and seemed to carry a calm that eased everyone nearby. Even without talking about interplanetary memories, people felt that he had brought back something real. Not information, but presence. A small circle of friends began to gather weekly at his home. There were no rituals, no followers, only sincere conversations and long moments of quiet. Together, they reflected on everyday spirituality, forgiveness, empathy, care. One participant, Sarah, shared how she had always felt like she didn't belong on Earth. After listening to Corey, she said she finally understood that her longing might not be for another planet, but for her own spiritual essence. These simple meetings became a source of silent healing. Corey called them shared remembrance, moments when one story awakens the soul of another. Gradually, he understood that the purpose of his memories was not to reveal cosmic secrets, but to awaken compassion in the here and now. The great mystery was no longer in the heavens, but in the human heart. Sometimes, the truest awakening doesn't happen among the stars. It happens within. Word of Corey's small gatherings spread quietly. There was no promotion, no movement, only resonance. Something in his words reached people beyond logic, stirring forgotten emotions. Those who came included therapists, scientists, artists, and ordinary seekers. Some had seen his old interviews. Others arrived through inexplicable coincidences. One man said he dreamed of Corey's face 3 nights in a row before finding his story online. Researchers began noticing what they called a collective resonance phenomenon, a wave of emotional memory spreading among people who felt called to remember something larger than themselves. Corey stayed humble. When one soul awakens, he said, others begin to remember. Meditation and discussion groups appeared in different countries. People who had never spoken about spirituality began talking about energy, kindness, and purpose. The story was no longer about one man. It had become a symbol of reconnection. Meanwhile, Corey continued living quietly, tending his plants, walking, writing. To remember, he wrote, is not to relive the past. It is to recognize what never stopped existing. For many, his presence acted as a key, unlocking understanding, reconciliation, and a more compassionate way of living. Filmmakers began documenting these gatherings not as miracles, but as human expressions of shared soul memory. The images captured tears, laughter, and serenity, people remembering who they are. Without intending to, Corey had become a bridge, proof that awakening is not a solitary act, but a collective breath of the universe. But with light came shadows. As more people joined the movement, deeper emotions began to surface. Grief, pain, confusion. The same awakening that inspired many also forced others to face what they had buried within. Corey felt the weight of these stories. He reminded everyone that the spiritual path was not an escape from darkness, but a compassionate encounter with it. Light doesn't erase shadows, he told them. It simply shows us where to look. People cried, questioned, and healed together. Corey confessed that he too faced doubts, not about his memories, but about his own understanding of them. Some memories free us, he wrote. Others test us. Both are bridges. We must choose whether to cross. The meetings became more introspective, raw, and human. Some people left, overwhelmed by their own emotions. Others stayed, determined to keep growing. The media reappeared, once again trying to define him. Mystic to some, delusional to others. Corey simply said, "People see what they're ready to see." He learned that remembrance, whether mystical or psychological, is only the first step. What truly matters is turning memory into wisdom. Then came a new invitation, one that would bring his story back to the world stage. A documentary about consciousness and reincarnation. The past was calling again, but this time not as mystery, as meaning. When the invitation arrived, Corey hesitated. He had avoided the spotlight for years, but something about this project felt right. The filmmakers weren't seeking sensationalism. They wanted to explore the human dimension of spiritual memory. Filming began in a quiet mountain town in Colorado. The director, Elise, was observant and patient. She wanted to capture truth, not spectacle. The first scenes showed Corey walking through snow-covered hills, speaking softly about silence as the place where memory breathes. During interviews, he explained that the purpose of his story was no longer about proof, but transformation. "What I lived taught me to be more human," he said. Elise also interviewed people who had attended his gatherings. Sarah spoke about finding peace after grief. Thomas, an engineer, told how Corey's story inspired him to volunteer. The film evolved. It became less about other planets and more about the power of compassion. Months passed. Cameras followed Corey meeting monks, scientists, and mediums, building bridges between faith and knowledge. In one unforgettable scene, he stood inside an observatory, gazing at the stars. His voice whispered in the background, "Maybe the universe isn't out there. Maybe it's within us." When Elise showed him the first cut, he watched silently, then smiled. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's the story, without control." The film premiered at an independent festival and received unexpected acclaim. It didn't promise truth, it offered humanity. People left the theater in silence, moved, as if remembering something ancient and nameless. The mystery had become emotion, and that, perhaps, was its greatest revelation. The documentary traveled far, across countries, languages, and beliefs. Critics called it a film about remembering humanity itself. Viewers wrote letters, shared reflections. A teacher said he now opened his classes with a minute of silence. A doctor confessed she no longer saw death as an end, but as part of a continuous learning cycle. Corey watched from his quiet home in the mountains. His life remained simple, tending his garden, writing, watching sunsets. "It's easy to speak of stars," he said. "What's hard is remembering to be light in the world." Elise described the experience as spiritual filmmaking. To film Corey, she said, was to watch silence become language. Universities began studying the documentary for its emotional and philosophical impact. Spiritual leaders from different faiths cited it as proof that empathy is the true bridge between science and soul. One unreleased scene showed Corey standing at dusk, facing the horizon as the wind whispered through the trees. His voice, calm and timeless, said, "Each life is a fragment of a greater cycle." Sometimes we remember the universe just to remember ourselves. It was the perfect ending, not closure, but awakening. Years later, Corey's name still evokes curiosity. But those who met him remember not the controversy, but his serenity. Stories like his remind us that memory is not about the past, it's about presence. Maybe the real infinity isn't above us, but within us. If this story touched you, subscribe to Circle of Lives and continue this journey of remembrance, reincarnation, and connection beyond time. Because every memory is a seed of eternity.